We heard Senate Majority Leader Reid talking about the Democratic proposal to extend the payroll tax cut. Going live now to the U.S. Senate, Senator Bill Nelson of Florida is speaking.
Was working in Cuba under a contract with the U.S. Agency for International Development. He has devoted his career to helping thousands of people around the world, working in development for over 25 years in more than 50 countries. In Cuba, Alan Gross was trying to make a difference in the lives of people who share his Jewish faith by bringing them modern communication tools. And for that simple act, he has now languished in a Cuban prison for 2 years. His health worsens each day. His family, of course, misses him. His wife, Judy, just spoke to him just days ago and said that Alan sounded more hopeless and more depressed, as you would expect. Mr. President, the release of Alan Gross must remain front and center in any discussion with or about the Cuban regime. And that's why many of us in this chamber have joined in writing to our ambassador, the ambassador of Cuba here, which, since we don't have diplomatic relations, is called the chief of the Cuban Interest Section, and asking the Castro regime to immediately and unconditionally release Alan Gross as a humanitarian gesture and a sign of compassion for his family. And yet, we are met with stonewalling silence. Mr. President, while we remember Mr. Gross and we keep pressure on the Castro regime, the Senate must also fulfill its duties toward the rest of the Western Hemisphere. And a case in point, 4 countries in Latin America are currently without a U.S. ambassador. That's the job of this Senate, to confirm appointments of the President. Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Ecuador. Now, in the case of Venezuela, it's not because we don't have a nominee, it's because, in fact, we're having some trouble with the Chavez government. And we've been without an Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs since July. Now, this isn't in the interest of the United States not to have these people in place. And so, we have basically 2 weeks to go if we get out a week before the Christmas holiday. That's an if, by the way. So during this time, while we go through all the things that we have to do, such as solving the doctor's problem, and such as extending this payroll tax cut, such as appropriations bills, such as extending unemployment compensation for people who desperately need it, and such as extending a lot of the tax extenders. So while we go through all of this in the next, 10 legislative days, then we also must fulfill our constitutional duty to consider these important presidential appointments. And there's one right in front of the Senate right now, the ambassador to El Salvador, Mari Carmen Aponte. She is the U.S. ambassador to El Salvador. She's well known all over the United States in Hispanic circles because she has held a number, as a Foreign Service officer, a number of posts. And during the August 2010 congressional recess, the President named her ambassador to El Salvador. That recess appointment is going to expire at the end of this year. Before joining the State Department, she served as Executive Director of the Puerto Rican Federal Affairs Administration and President of the very respected Hispanic National Bar Association. Typical sentiment in Florida, expressed in a recent Miami Herald editorial that supported her confirmation, saying that, quote, her diplomatic success has earned her unprecedented support of the private sector and of most prominent political leaders in El Salvador. Mr. President, it was unprecedented that 3 former presidents of El Salvador came all the way to Washington to show their support during her nomination hearing. My wife Grace and I were recently visited by the First Lady of El Salvador, and what she pointed out of all of these terrible events in her country struggling to recover from the tropical depression that made the landfall this past fall, the heavy rains caused major damage throughout Central America, and 70,000 Salvadoranians are living in shelters. And that little country faces many challenges. So, if for no other reason, we don't need to continue after the end of the year not to have an ambassador. We need to confirm Mrs. Aponte as soon as possible so that she continue exercising the necessary U.S. leadership. Latin American countries continue to be America's fastest growing trade partners. We need to continue to promote that trade. It helps our economy. It deepens the economic linkages. We can explore clean energy initiatives, and we can help them as they continue to strengthen transparency in government and the rule of law. We need to pay more attention to Latin America, not less. Disengagement is not the answer. So this is just another reason, Mr. President, that we need to confirm this nomination as quickly as possible for the ambassador to El Salvador. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Iowa.
Yes, the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Alaska.
Mr. President, request that proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today to honor a gentleman, John Katz. John is a longtime public servant to the state of Alaska who is set to retire at year's end. John has served Alaska for more than 40 years, working for 8 different governors, Republican and Democrats, liberals and conservatives. He once said that he was comfortable serving so many different governors because the issues for Alaska were consistent, whether they be responsible resource development, state sovereignty, federal assistance with infrastructure. The one constant figure connecting one administration after the next over 8 administrations, the one constant figure has been John Katz. John started his career as a high school teacher and coach in Baltimore City Public Schools back in 1966, following his graduation from Johns Hopkins University. In 1969, he earned his law degree from the University of California at Berkeley, and then he moved to Alaska to work as a legislative and administrative assistant to Congressman Pollock, and then later for Senator Ted Stevens. John has truly played many crucial roles for the state of Alaska. He served for several years as the counsel to the Joint Federal-State Land Use Planning Commission for the state of Alaska. He served as special counsel to Governor Jay Hammond back in 1979, advocating the state's position on the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, or ANILCA, to Congress. 2 years after that, he was appointed Commissioner of Natural Resources by Governor Hammond. And then in 1983, John was sent by Governor Bill Sheffield to head Alaska's Washington, D.C. office, and he has served as the liaison between the state and the federal government for the past 28 years. Pretty remarkable record, if you would consider. Now, as Alaskans, we know how important his role has been in bridging the very considerable gap between our state and the federal government, a key role when more than 60% of Alaska's lands is controlled by the federal government. Now, you could refer to John as Alaska's 4th congressman. His 40-year tenure in the league of the late Senator Stevens and Representative Don Young. John's breadth of knowledge and understanding of Alaska's issues has guided him in his very unique role. Since entering public service, John has been involved in key issues such as the passage of the landmark Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act back in 1971, the legislation in 1976 which extended America's fisheries zones to 200 miles, which allowed for the Americanization of Alaska's fishing fleet. And there was also the passage back in 1980 of the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act, the nation's largest conservation lands measure. There was the Alaska Railroad Transfer Act back in 1983, the Tongass Timber Reform Act in 1990, and 30 other major pieces of legislation and hundreds of amendments that have greatly affected the lives of all Alaskans. Now, what is so remarkable about John is that there is no Alaskan public policy issue that he did not master. A pretty incredible feat there, but no Alaska public policy issue that he did not have his fingerprints involved with or really have a mastery of. In 1972, for example, he served for 2 years on the Executive Advisory Committee of the Federal Power Commission, making decisions on electricity generation during a period of rapid population growth in Alaska. In 1974, he published a legal analysis of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and how it should impact Native Alaskans for the Joint Federal-State Land Use Planning Commission. Then 5 years later, he served on the Hard Rock Minerals Commission of Alaska, helping to chart the course for the rebirth of our state's mineral industry. There is seemingly no Alaska issue that is too complex or daunting for John Katz. I first met John, it was probably somewhere in the early 80s. At the time, I was a staffer in the office of the Speaker of the Alaska House of Representatives in Juneau. And I was immediately taken by the kindness of this gentleman. Extraordinarily polite to a very young staffer, but also his intellectual prowess that was shown, whether it was a casual conversation or whether it was a detailed policy analysis. Former Governor Tony Knowles called him, quote, one of the most remarkable public servants I've ever dealt with. Governor Hammond, during the lengthy debate over ANILCA, called him truly indispensable. And Senator Stevens once said, and this is his quote, he is as near a genius as I've seen. I would clearly agree with that. Some of his coworkers have even jokingly called him their own human Google machine, noting that in many cases it was just more efficient, it was just easier to walk down the hall and ask John for legal and policy background, save them hours of research, and John just had it all there. Just instant recall and precise as it could possibly be. Throughout his career, John served effectively and quietly, always preferring to work in the background, never seeking that limelight. He always presented every side of the issue, never telling any of his superiors simply what they might have wanted to hear. He truly was the consummate professional, a man who never got a fact wrong in a briefing, in a discussion, or in a political strategy session. And that may have been at least one of the many reasons why he has been so honored during his career, receiving the Alaska Federation of Natives' highest honor, which is the Denali Award, winning Commonwealth North's 2008 Walter J. Hickel Award for Distinguished Public Policy Leadership, and receiving more resolutions, commendations, and praise than most in Alaska's history. John has built a reputation as an Alaskan institution, always loyally serving our beloved state. He has championed oil exploration in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, noting the potential benefits for not only Alaska's economy, but more important, for America's overall economic and national security. And while John has listed the failure so far to persuade Congress to open ANWR as perhaps one of his biggest disappointments, he has always stood by the factually solid arguments for opening ANWR, never letting his passionate advocacy of opening the coastal refuge get in the way of objectively presenting the arguments to members of Congress. I think it is important to note John's statement in his resignation letter to Governor Parnell. He stated the following. He says, professionally, I have become increasingly discouraged by the polarization and deterioration of the public policy process at the federal level. It's the worst I've seen during my 43-year career. That was a statement in John's resignation note. And as someone who has relied on John's wise counsel and his wisdom during my 8 years here in the United States Senate, I think that this is a poignant remark about the state of affairs in Congress today. The debate surrounding our politics has, I think, grown more caustic, while ignoring the fact that while we all may take different positions, we all ultimately have our nation's interests at heart. John leaves an esteemed legacy that will benefit Alaska for decades to come. We can learn so much from his example of what a public servant should be, and Alaska will deeply, deeply miss his presence. I know that I speak for all Alaskans in sincerely thanking John for his years of dedicated service and his pragmatic approach to faithfully serving the state of Alaska. I wish him nothing but the best in the future for all of his endeavors. With that, Mr. President, I thank you. I yield the floor, and I would suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
passed.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise today about the most important job that faces the Senate in the remainder of the year, and that is extending the unemployment benefits for millions of unemployed Americans struggling to find a job. I wish I didn't have to be down here talking about this today. I wish it weren't necessary to debate whether we should continue the federal unemployment insurance program. I wish everyone in this chamber would acknowledge that the recovery is still a work in progress, and that we would agree about the critical need to continue to support struggling workers and their families. We've never failed to extend benefits in the past when unemployment was this high. But unfortunately, in today's hyper-partisan atmosphere, even the most common-sense policies can turn into political footballs, and the unemployment insurance program seems to be no exception. The extreme right is on the attack, blaming the victims who have been the hardest hit by this economic crisis. In the same breath that they push for more cuts in corporate taxes and cuts in taxes to high-income individuals, Republican leaders argue that we can't afford to extend unemployment benefits for people who are struggling to find a job. Congresswoman Bachmann, a candidate for president, recently went so far as to say, and I quote, "If anyone will not work, neither should he eat." In an economy where there are 4 unemployed workers for every available job, the cruelty of that comment is simply astonishing. There are 13 million unemployed Americans right now. Actually, I think the figure is probably a little bit higher than that, probably closer to maybe 16 million. They are desperately looking for any job they can find, many relying on unemployment benefits to put food on the table for their children. 6 million Americans will be cut off of this last lifeline if Congress does not renew the benefits for the long-term unemployed. 6 million will be cut off during this holiday season. I hope no one in this body on either side of the aisle would say that they deserve this additional hardship during this holiday season. Now, there are real people and real families behind these numbers. They are our friends and neighbors. I've heard from so many of these hardworking people from my home state of Iowa and across the country. Their stories are truly heartbreaking. A woman from Des Moines recently wrote me, I quote, "I was laid off in July 2011. I recently attended a class at the unemployment office in Des Moines where I was informed that my unemployment will cease as of December the 31st, if any extensions that are currently in place are discontinued. The average person is currently unemployed for 40 weeks, which is much longer than the 26 weeks that is available without any extensions. I was the main breadwinner in our family, and if my unemployment would cease before I find a job, we would be forced to be on welfare. We would be forced to be on food stamps and other government subsidies. We would also lose our home. I hope that you consider the many other people that are probably in the same situation as I am and hope that you will keep the current extensions in place." End quote. A woman from Stanton, Iowa writes, and I quote, "I lost a great job in June of 2010 and have been receiving unemployment benefits since then. If not for the unemployed benefits, I don't know how we would make it. I continue to look for a better paying job, but as you probably know, Montgomery County has had the highest unemployment rate in Iowa. It's been tough. We'll appreciate your support in extending unemployment benefits as I continue my quest for a new position." End quote. Mr. President, the main reason that folks need their benefits to continue is they simply cannot find new work, even after exhausting their benefits. There are simply not enough jobs in this struggling economy. How can we even think about abruptly terminating these benefits right now, cutting off the last lifeline that these Americans in dire need? A man from Esterville, Iowa wrote, quote, "I woke up last week to find my benefits exhausted, but no closer to finding a job. I do everything possible to find work, but nothing materializes. Age discrimination is rampant, and there's nothing an individual can do about it. Right now, after working since I was 12 years old, I'm facing hunger and hopelessness at 57 years of age." A man from West Des Moines wrote, quote, I'm a home designer architect and have been laid off 3 times since 2007 after working almost 16 years at one firm. I have now decided to go back to school to try to find a different career in information technology. I hate not having a job and want to work, but there's just not anything out there in architecture. Everyone seems to have circled the wagons and are not hiring. Please help. A woman from Madrid, Iowa writes, quote, I lost my job of 32 years, 2.5 years ago. I lived off my severance for the first year, then savings, then went on unemployment. Now my unemployment has run out. I have had a few interviews without any luck. I've been working part-time for minimum wage, and I only get 15 hours a week in. It's the only job that I could find. Mr. President, this is just a sampling of the letters that we get in our office. But it's clear that people want to work. They desperately want to work. Later this week, the committee that I chair, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, will hold a hearing to look at the reasons so many millions of workers who want to work are unable to get back to new jobs quickly. We will hear from experts, workers, and community leaders about the barriers facing the long-term unemployed, especially those over the age of 50. But there are some things we don't need an expert to tell us. We know people can't find new jobs because there are so few jobs out there. As I said, right now, more than 13 to 16 million people officially counted as actively looking for work. But that's an understatement. There are millions more people with part-time jobs of necessity who want full-time work. Millions more on top of that who have basically stopped looking for work because they think a job search will be fruitless. They've already tried time and time again, and they've given up. But if they had a job, if they got a job, they'd take it. When we add them all up, when you add up all of that, plus a number of young people who have not entered the workforce, maybe they've looked for work, they can't find it, they're young, and especially if they're young and African American, where the unemployment rate soars to above 30 to 40%. They're not counted as part of the unemployed because they've never had a job. But they can't find one. But they're not counted. So if you add up all that, we're talking about nearly 28 million unemployed and marginally employed people in America. There are many other barriers to reemployment. I've talked about older workers. Not only have many of them gone through their retirement savings, many have lost the home that they spent decades paying a mortgage on. They've been unable to send their kids to college. On top of that, they face the indignity of being passed over in favor of younger workers simply because of their age. Again, that's not to say that young workers have an easy time. I've also heard, as I said, many stories of young people, many with college degrees, who can't find work. They're piecing together a meager existence on part-time service jobs that waste the time, effort, and money they poured into an expensive education. I can't tell you how many young people I've talked to who have got a college degree. They are not working in their chosen profession, but they're working at mostly part-time work or at service-oriented jobs that they know will not last them a lifetime. And service-oriented jobs that pay them a pittance of what they should be earning with their college degrees. Still other workers here, they can't be considered by certain employers because they've been unemployed for too long. This is so even when a recruiter tells them they are perfectly qualified for the job. More workers would like to move in order to take advantage of a new opportunity they've heard about elsewhere, but guess what? Their house is underwater. I mean, not physically. That means that they owe more on their mortgage than what the house is worth, and they can't sell it. Or they've been out of work so long they have no money left to even afford a move. They can't even afford to pack up the U-Haul and move someplace. Still other workers have trouble with transportation or child care or other day-to-day issues that make it much harder to get an employer to take a chance on them. Someone came up, someone said to me one time, well, you know, people who don't get a job, there are places in this country where there are jobs, they can move. It's a free country. I said, well, what about What about a single mother, got 2 kids, and she relies upon her mother as a babysitter, as a child care person to take care of the kids when she's out working on a minimum wage job, maybe part-time? How's she going to pack up and move those kids when she's got, quite frankly, free help from her mother? Now, these are real barriers that real people face every day in their lives. I think they illustrate why the long-term unemployed who are working hard and playing by the rules still can't get a job because of factors beyond their control. Rather than chastising the victims, we should be giving a hand up to people in their hour of greatest need and helping them to get back in the workforce. This support is critical, not only for the workers and families affected, but for our economy overall. Research shows that for every dollar of unemployed benefits that are spent, we generate $2 in economic activity. Now, why is that? Because this money is not saved, it's not put into a shoebox, it's spent on essentials, helping businesses up and down Main Street and communities across the country. In addition, if unemployment benefits are extended, we will save about 560,000 jobs, according to the Economic Policy Institute. By contrast, if we fail to renew these benefits, our economy will be deprived of many tens of billions of dollars in economic activity next year. And again, this will have a negative impact on overall gross domestic product. So on the one hand, with benefits, we boost our economy with a potent return on investment. We help people in their hour of need. We meet our moral obligations as a society. But without benefits, we hurt our economy by shrinking consumer demand, by destroying jobs, and we don't meet our moral obligation as a caring government and a caring people. So there's a strong economic case for renewing unemployment insurance, but I also say there's a strong human case for extending the benefits. Where is our basic human compassion? The thought of letting these benefits expire is unconscionable, especially during this Christmas season. After looking for work for at least 6 months, but often more, many of these people already have lost their jobs, their homes, their savings, are now in risk of losing their last lifeline, the roughly $300 a week they receive in unemployment benefits. The bills don't stop coming when someone loses his or her job. The rent or mortgage, the electricity, the car payments all have to be made. The family still has to buy food, gasoline, medicine, school supplies, clothes. Unemployment benefits are a lifeline for the millions of folks who are living without an income and just trying to survive. These benefits kept more than 3 million people from falling into poverty last year. We have a moral obligation, those of us privileged to serve in the Senate and the House, to continue the federal unemployment insurance programs while the economy continues to slowly recover. We cannot allow these benefits to expire. We cannot allow millions of our friends, neighbors, and relatives to sink into absolute poverty and desperation. We cannot fail to take action, because that failure will result in families being put out on the street, children going to bed hungry, families left to shiver in the cold of their unheated homes. So I urge my colleagues to vote on this matter as soon as possible. During this holiday season, it's cruel to put millions of unemployed Americans in the position of wondering how they're going to survive come January the 1st of next year. So let us renew these benefits for another year. Let us spend the next year doing everything we can to rebuild our economy, create jobs, provide employment to everyone who wants to work in this great nation. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
News.